Hi everyone, it's Steve. Today I wanted to review a little game called Pentiment. This game was such a gem, and it's one of those few games that have actually changed my real life perspective on people, how we tell stories about ourselves and each other, and how both personal and societal history are remembered. Before I get into why I loved this game so much, credit where credit is due. I would not have found this game without Gamers with Jobs, which is currently one of my favorite podcasts. Give it a listen. I highly recommend it if you're looking for discussions and recommendations of cool non AAA games. As someone with a full time job and two young kids, I simply don't have the time to research and cultivate a game playlist of my own, much less find great games that aren't well advertised or widely played. Fair warning, as this game is heavily narrative driven and mystery themed, I'm going to split this review into two parts. First, a discussion of the general themes and concepts that really resonated with me, followed by a more spoiler heavy section at the end of this video. Don't worry, I'll warn you when we get there. I think that this game is in some ways spoiler proof because there are branching storylines that you can't encounter in a single playthrough, and there is significant uncertainty about what really happened, who was right and wrong, and which stories are true. But I do respect people's ability to go through a game without having the story spoiled for them. So for those people, you won't want to finish the last part of this video. Let's get into the meat of it now. One of the things I absolutely loved about this game was that it never once departed from its commitment to layered, interesting, and nuanced characters. And even though you walk through a town of vastly different people with vastly different attitudes and temperaments, this game has a story for everybody that if you sit around their table and listen, they will tell you. I remember having a conversation with my brother in law about Lost back in the day, a show that we both loved, at least for part of its run. And I remember him saying something that stuck with me, that what he loved the most about the first season was that the people were the mystery, not the plot, not the island, but these strangers who were dropped here and had to discover each other through their shared trauma. I felt this way with Pentiment, to be honest. For all of the mystery of this game's plot, the people were always the greatest mystery, and the one that I was most interested in unraveling. And that resonated with me so deeply. There were so many individual stories that unfolded as the game went on, some of which you don't have time to explore on a single playthrough. This shows up even in the smallest details. It blew my mind how intricately researched this game was and how it layered personal world building into the most basic elements and mechanics. Even the character creation mechanism is enacted through conversations with people as you tell them your history before you came back to visit the town, which then opens up different dialogue options later on. I thought this was an exceptional way to handle character creation, and it really immersed me in the world from the outset. Beyond that, one of the main ways that you learn about other characters and which threads to pull or which clues to pursue is by sitting down to eat with different families in the town. It's such a beautiful, down to earth choice that the game chose to embed some of the core elements of its story in the most basic, timeless aspect of what makes us human: sitting down and eating with each other, something that the pandemic put on pause for quite some time. Maybe that's why it resonated with me so much. It becomes readily apparent in this game that one of the historical backdrops, which is not a spoiler, is that the setting of this game is a 16th century Bavarian town that is beset by income inequality and differing social stratas, which the game does not shy away from. And one of the most creative ways they present character details is through what food the different families have on their table during the meals I mentioned before. It is a way that the game tells a story about each person's status in society, as well as their own personal story, without using a single word. At one point, you sit down with a character who is clearly more well off than the others, but it isn't stated in words. It is shown on the plate that they serve you. After finishing this game, I read an interview with Hannah Kennedy, the art director, and Hannah talked at length about how food was a focal point and something that was meticulously researched and intentionally chosen as a narrative device. And it shows. To quote the interview, which I have linked in the commentary on this video, it wasn't just what the dish was and what it was named, but how it looked and how it was reflected differently in the plates of the people that were peasants versus the plates of the people that were nobility or even the middle class. I was so impressed by how consistent this detail was throughout and the story that it told. For what it's worth, too, Hannah did such a brilliant job with the art of this game as well, just in general. It is amazing, and it really feels like art that is both true to the art of the time, as far as my limited understanding is concerned, but also easily accessible to the style of game. It flows extremely well. Even the fonts with which the different characters' dialogues are written say something about them. I can't really say much more without getting into spoilers, so I'm going to warn you that if you haven't played this game and you want to go into it spoiler free, just stop the video right here. And my recommendation to you is to go buy this game. It's cheap, it's a short game, but even in my brief single playthrough, it changed my perspective on storytelling, both in games and I would say in real life as well. All right, spoilers ahead. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention at the outset two pretty significant content warnings on the front end. Although this is not a terribly graphic game visually, there is a point in the game where it is revealed to you that the main character's child died. Um, it's revealed in a beautiful and surprising way, but if this happened to you in your life and it is too much to relive, I would recommend steering clear of this game. As a parent, I don't know if I could handle that if I had lost a child, so I would certainly respect that boundary. Secondly, although you may not run into this particular storyline on your first playthrough, as it is a side character, there is a nun who was sexually assaulted, and she describes it to you in some detail. Again, not graphic detail, but enough to know exactly what took place. What makes it even more worthy of mentioning here is that it was at the hands of a character that Andreas, the main character of the first two acts, has had conversations with and has gotten to know at this point in the story. The game does not shy away from controversial things, even in its subplots. In one of the branching storylines, for example, your character gets one of the nuns pregnant and she has the pregnancy aborted. Andreas is not free from the consequences of his actions on the lives of other people. None of the characters are. This is something that really stuck with me after I finished this game, even in the process of solving the mystery through the 3 chapters. Depending on what clues you follow or what threads you decide to pull, you can actually make the objectively wrong choices, and the game absolutely lets you fail, then keeps on rolling without blinking. My first time playing through this game, I was going about trying to solve the mystery, thought I had the culprit, it was all lining up, but then it dawned on me, just as the trial and execution were taking place, that I had gotten the wrong person. But the game gives you absolutely no ability to stop the train from rolling, and you are forced to either witness the execution of someone that you accused wrongly or choose to look away, which is both a narrative choice and, more subtly, I think, a content sensitivity mechanic. To be honest, I had to sit and think for a moment afterwards. It made me keenly aware of some of the judgments I entertain about people in my life and how risky it is to take it that one step further, knowing there's a point where it's too late to take it back. This is so true to real life. Maybe not to the point of actually getting someone killed most of the time, but sometimes you realize the awfulness of your decisions well after you have the ability to stop the consequences. The game builds this lesson into the mechanics, which is impressive. In Act 2, the player is able to make the same mistake again, and I did, leading to the truly terrible death of one of the characters in an act of mob violence. The mystery gets away from you and becomes a creature of its own that you cannot control, long before you realize you're in over your head. Honestly, the game handles it so well that I'm not entirely sure if you're able to actually make the right decision, and I'm not sure I care. It's as much a narrative choice within the game as it is a commentary on its own genre and the tendency, I would say, for some mystery games to be so caught up in their plot that the people become unimportant except for moving the main plot forward. I have never interacted with a murder mystery game quite like this, that allows you to be so wrong, and instead of losing at that point, like other mystery games might, you are faced with the consequences of your choice, and then the story keeps moving, and the rest of it is informed by your decision. It is such a meaningful choice for this genre of game, as brutal as it is to realize that you may have gotten an innocent person killed. It doesn't hold your hand or force an ending where you're either right or wrong. It's gray, and I loved that. The most powerful thing about this game, though, beyond that, is its layers. And there's a reason I put this in the spoiler section. I was fortunate enough to have the meaning of the word pentiment explained to me before I played. Again, thank you, gamers with jobs. For reference, it is defined as, quote, an underlying image in a painting, especially one that has become visible when the top layer of paint has turned transparent with age, providing evidence of revision by the artist. And boy, does this game deliver exactly that in every aspect of its experience. It is true to its name at every turn. First, there are the layers to the characters you meet, and your own main character, none of whom are exactly who they seem when you first meet them, and all of whom have something under the surface that informs their actions and their words. Whether it's pain, loss, privilege, unjust systems, or family dynamics, their own stories about themselves and the people around them are revised and biased, and at times are even colored by who they're talking to, specifically Andreas. Not everyone likes him. Second, there are layers to the way that history itself is told, both societal and personal. In the third act of the game, you play as a character, Magdalene, who has grown up since Andreas's death some years before at the end of Act 2, and the characters tell you about what happened through their lens, which is entirely informed by how Andreas chose to act earlier in the game. The characters either believe in what Andreas did, or who he accused, or not. But they tell Magdalene about it as fact, even if you just experienced it, as Andreas, with much more nuance and uncertainty. History is revised and the nuance covered over as it is told. Each act is a layer, and you as the player are aware of the layers because you just walked through them, but they are entirely unapparent to the characters. It is a masterful story about storytelling in many ways, and how layers of experiences can be passed down from one person or generation to the next with less and less nuance than they carried as they occurred. It really made me reflect on the way that we tell stories, or the way that I tell stories about myself. I can recall a few times after I finished this game that I was able to reflect on layers I was seeing in my own family which had eluded me for years. There are things that the player doesn't even learn about Andreas until later in the story, because he has chosen to bury them, and the game lets you rediscover them as he unearths them himself, as opposed to having the player be omniscient. And finally, in Act 3, Magdalene is asked to complete a mural, and you find out that the town itself has pentiments of its own, literally buried underneath the ground. History lost to the layers of time itself and to the efforts of those who wish for it to remain hidden. The villain of the story, quote unquote, who unsurprisingly has more layers and nuance than your average villain, is one of the characters you would least expect, and this individual attempts to revise and hide the town's history, the pentiments underneath. The way it is presented is so well paced and interesting, and the fact that the name of the game applies even to the one town stage where the game is set is brilliant. It would be like if the stage and the theater itself were presented as a character in a play, but without pretense. I cannot say enough about how wonderful this little game is. It took me about 17 hours to complete, but I am itching to play it again to see what stories I missed. Even knowing the reveal, quote unquote, at the end of who actually enacted the murders, it makes me no less excited to walk back through the story, which is just as much about the townsfolk, the history, and the art as it is about the plot itself. Like, honestly, I want to know what's going on with this Martin Bauer guy, and I didn't get to finish that plot line in my first playthrough. Like, what happened to his scar for real? Who is this guy? I just love this game, and I would highly recommend it. Worth every second I spent in that world, and it certainly gave me a lot to ponder and reflect on in my own story. Stories of those around me and the stories that we tell ourselves about the world around us. So I'll see you next time. Until then, I think I'll take a break, give it some space, then do another playthrough, peeling the layers off of the town back further. I can't think of a better way to spend an evening.